There are places that are undoubtedly independent sovereign countries, places like Belgium, Egypt, Canada, or Japan. Then there are places that are definitely not countries. Even if I were to declare, for example, that the island of Key West in Florida was a country, well, as I don't have sovereignty over it, and as it would go without any international recognition, it would be difficult to argue that it is. But in the middle of these, there is an interesting in-between. Partially recognized countries. Whether or not these places are a country is often a source of disagreement. There are several types of partially recognized countries. Some may function as independent nations, but as part of a major international dispute, go unrecognized by other members of the UN. Others might not be permitted in the United Nations, but may have recognition by UN member states. Some might be aspiring countries, not yet functioning as independent, but with an ally in the UN who recognizes them. These partially recognized countries are also often very controversial. There is no end to disagreement about them. I have, of course, my own opinions on each of the topics I'm going to discuss, but it would be irresponsible of me to let those opinions affect the facts I'm presenting. I am going to try to make this video as unbiased as possible, giving you the information you need to have your own opinion and not try to force you to agree with mine. Hello and welcome to That Is Interesting. I'm your host Carter. Today, from most recognized to least recognized, the partially recognized countries of the world and the controversies surrounding them. Number 1. South Korea. Most people consider South Korea a legitimate country, except, of course, their neighbor to the north. North Korea is the only member of the United Nations not to recognize South Korea as a country. Throughout most of their history, North and South Korea were just one country, Korea, with a unified culture, society, and language. But in 1905, Korea was invaded by Japan, who were beginning to form a colonial empire, and would go on to invade China, Taiwan, and much of Southeast Asia in the Pacific. But Japan and its fascist allies lost World War II. Out of the war's winners were left two major superpowers with very different ideologies, the United States and the Soviet Union. These two superpowers would divide up the world into spheres of influence and draw new borders for countries that lost the war. The hostility between them, called the Cold War, would last for decades, until the Soviet Union collapsed. It would manifest itself in proxy wars, with the US and the USSR backing different sides in different conflicts, but never actually going to war against each other themselves. One of these proxy wars occurred in Korea, which had been divided after World War II along a latitude line called the 38th parallel, into a pro-Soviet North and a pro-American South. Two regimes were set up, a communist one in North Korea and a capitalist one in South Korea. While the goal was for this division to last only a few years and to be replaced by a reunified Korea, it never happened. The US and USSR didn't want to give up influence in the peninsula, and the communist North Koreans and capitalist South Koreans each wanted their way of life to be the dominant one on the peninsula, each installing an authoritarian leader as head of state, although South Korea would eventually become a successful democracy. The Soviet-backed North Koreans soon invaded South Korea, starting the Korean War. The US backed the South and pushed the North Koreans back to a ceasefire line that today functions as the border between the divided halves of the country. In the end, millions of people were killed, and neither country was victorious. Each is still technically at war with the other, as no peace treaty was ever signed between the two. Although North and South Korea each function as sovereign, independent countries, both claim ownership of the entire Korean peninsula, and refuse to recognize one another's sovereignty. Number 2. Armenia. Armenia is recognized by every country in the UN, except for one that you might not expect, Pakistan. Even though the two share no border and lie more than 1,000 miles apart, Pakistan does not recognize Armenia as a country. This is because Pakistan is a close friend and ally of two countries that don't get along well with Armenia, Turkey and Azerbaijan. Turkey claims that the Armenian genocide, when 1.5 million ethnic Armenians were killed by the Ottoman Empire during World War I, did not happen, and Pakistan supports that claim. Disagreements between Armenia and Azerbaijan revolve around a region called Artsakh. The region is located inside of Azerbaijan, but is home to mostly ethnic Armenians who want independence and possibly unification with Armenia. In the 1980s, Artsakh, backed by Armenia, went to war with Azerbaijan, leading to Pakistan's refusal to recognize them. Number 3. Cyprus. Cyprus is recognized by every country but one, Turkey. The large island in the Mediterranean is home to a Greek majority and a Turkish minority, and many of Cyprus's citizens don't really want Cyprus to be a country. Many Greek Cypriots advocate enosis, or unification with Greece, and many Turkish Cypriots want unification with Turkey or independence for the island's north. The island's history has been marred with violence between the two groups, ever since independence from Britain in 1960, with Greek Cypriots overthrowing the government in 1974 in an attempt for enosis, unification with Greece. In response to this coup, Turkey invaded the island, gaining control of its northern half. This invasion displaced many Cypriots, with Greek Cypriots fleeing the Turkish-controlled north and Turkish Cypriots fleeing the pro-enosis south. Today, the island remains split between the Turkish north and the Greek south. The Turkish Cypriots claim sovereignty over the northern half of the island, calling themselves the Republic of Northern Cyprus. Turkey recognizes Northern Cyprus as a country and does not recognize the sovereignty of the current country of Cyprus. However, the rest of the international community does not support Turkey's position on this issue, with every other country recognizing Cyprus as the rightful owners of the island and refusing to recognize Northern Cyprus. Today, the island, though unified officially, is divided between north and south by a wall known as the Green Line, which cuts their capital and largest city, Nicosia, in half. The situation is further complicated by the existence of Akrotiri and Dhekelia, parts of the island that are still owned by the UK and used as military bases. The fourth partially recognized country in this list is North Korea, which is unrecognized by South Korea as well as France, Japan, and Taiwan, which is not a member of the UN. But as we've already talked about the dispute between North and South Korea, I'll move on to number 5, China. China is unrecognized by 14 other members of the United Nations, all of whom recognize Taiwan instead. Vatican City, which is not in the UN but is widely recognized as a country, also recognizes Taiwan instead of China, and Bhutan recognizes neither of them. Taiwan, a large island 100 miles off the Chinese mainland, has been part of China for much of its history. Since 1912, China had been a republic, called the Republic of China, or the ROC, and was led by a military leader named Chiang Kai-shek and his political party, the Kuomintang. But after World War II, the ROC's rule was challenged by a man named Mao Zedong, who led a communist revolution in China and waged a long civil war against Chiang. Mao was ultimately successful, winning the civil war and founding the Communist People's Republic of China, or PRC. Chiang Kai-shek and the Kuomintang fled to Taiwan, where they governed the Republic of China in exile. The UN recognized the Republic of China as the legitimate government of China for years, but in 1971 they switched recognition to the Communist PRC and ousted the ROC from the UN. Over the years, the Kuomintang has seen declining influence in Taiwan, and although the government still officially claims control of mainland China, many Taiwanese people see this as unrealistic. The ROC, which began its time in Taiwan with the intention of the island being only an interim capital, has evolved from being the Chinese government in exile to simply the government of Taiwan. Mainland China, however, still claims ownership of the island, and as such, many members of the UN are torn on whether to recognize China or to recognize Taiwan. The 6th and 7th partially recognized countries on this list are probably the most controversial. Nearly everyone has an opinion on Israel and Palestine, one of the most complicated disagreements on this list. The region, historically known as Palestine, is an epicenter of religion, home to many of the most holy sites in Judaism, Islam, and Christianity, especially in the old city of Jerusalem. Historically, it had been a homeland for both Jews and Arabs, but when Britain took control of it from Turkey after World War I, it was home to a mostly Muslim Arab population. Following the horrifying persecution of European Jews during the Holocaust, there was widespread support, internationally, for the establishment of a Jewish state. Jews had been settling in Palestine for decades, but after World War II, Britain decided to support the creation of a Jewish state in Palestine. In 1947, the United Nations partitioned the region into two countries, a Jewish state of Israel and an Arab state of Palestine, with Jerusalem acting as an international city belonging to neither country. But neighboring Arab countries were strongly opposed to Israel's creation and immediately invaded it, starting what was known as the Arab-Israeli War. At the end of the war, Israel had captured much of Palestine, with its two remaining parts, the West Bank and Gaza, ending up in the hands of Jordan and Egypt. The region has been in conflict ever since, with many more wars and skirmishes breaking out between Israelis and Palestinians, and with the city of Jerusalem split in two. Today, Palestine claims control of the West Bank and Gaza, although Israel maintains a high degree of influence in the West Bank and claims it is a disputed area belonging to neither of them. This conflict has led many countries to side with one or the other, and refuse to simultaneously recognize both parts of this divided region. 162 countries recognize Israel, and 138 recognize Palestine. This is part 1 of a 2-part series on partially recognized countries. Part 2 is out as well, so make sure to watch it if you enjoyed this first video. Thank you for watching this video, and I hope you learned something new. Subscribe for more content like this. I cover the countries, cities, people, and places of the world and beyond. These videos will leave you saying, "That is interesting."